How's it going, everyone? I hope you've had a good day. I'm back again, and I'm titling this video "The Greatest Pandemic." Um, this whole situation in the world right now, everything with COVID-19 has really, I think, shed light on. What's funny is the pandemic that we're going through right now is has shed light on what has been the greatest pandemic throughout human history, which is the centralization of power. The greatest pandemic throughout all of human history, because it never dies, has been the centralization of power. Because with the centralization of power, comes monopolized coercion. And coercion being that you are forced to do something against your will, either just by blunt force or the threat of action against you. And look, not all coercion is necessarily bad. You know, if a kid doesn't clean the room and the parents tell them to, they should get grounded, or some sort of recourse should happen. If somebody doesn't come to class continually, they should fail the class. You know, if somebody drives drunk, they should get a DUI, and X, Y, and Z. You know, coercion in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. Just depends on who is doing the coercing and why they're doing it. But as we've seen in history, the most egregious actions and the most evil actions on a grand scale have been done by the centralization of power in government regimes and all sorts of government regimes. And all these collectivist governments such as socialism, communism, corporatism, even anarchy, pure democracy because it's a majority rule, and the values and the direction of the country are just based on what the majority feels, what they vote on. You know, it's based on their subjectivity. And in anarchy, it's still coercion, but just on an individual level. You know, without any sort of governing body, now you have all these individual actions of coercion and evils without any sort of justice. But then on the flip side, with a gross centralization of power, you have those that are in charge, a small few that are in charge, creating the rules, creating what's right and what's wrong for the rest of the people, because they've put the government first and the people second. So what's going on with China right now has really shown what happens when we allow when a country centralizes, or allows for the government to be centralized, I should say, and to nationalize basically everything. Obviously, the Maoist revolution was a revolution that those who were fighting for freedom lost. And like I said, over 50 million of the people have died because of it and through it, and since then. And all these different forms of government, they're all concentrations of power for the benefit of those that are in power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely when those that are in charge feel as if there's nothing in their way to stop them. And that's how China, other than America, that's how China has felt. But even then, they still are screwing us over in many ways. They're stealing our data. The China will stop at nothing to knock us off from being top dog, basically. Because all they care about, like I said, is money and power and greed. And they don't have the morals we have. The Chinese government, the quasi-communist Chinese government, will stop at nothing to continue to obtain more power. And we see that. We see that happening through them stealing the world's data through apps like TikTok, which is Chinese, and thus their data is given to the quasi-communist Chinese government through companies like Huawei, a huge telecommunications company, through paying off world organizations like the World Health Organization. China is literally paying off the World Health Organization to lie about the amount of cases in China right now, which apparently is zero, which we all know is a lie, and for the numbers in Taiwan too. they're putting up a front for China because China's coerced them to. They continually, China is silencing people, their own citizens that actually want to put out the truth of what's going on and what has happened with Corona. They're just silencing them. China has welded its own people, many of its own people that came down with COVID-19 in the beginning, just welded them into the apartments, then came back weeks later and found them dead. Just dead. That's the power that China has. Because they don't care about their own people, and they certainly don't care about the people of the world. China is the greatest example of the evils that are born out of centralized power and the amount of coercion that comes with that. And they're not the greatest example because they're the strongest government on earth, or strongest country on earth. But as the quasi-communist government that they are, they're the most willing to use any means necessary to attain power. And we see this struggle now between individualism and collectivism in America. We see this happening now. And we've seen this happening for decades. And look, I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care. You could be the most blue-haired, Che Guevara-loving leftist, or the most John Stuart Mill-loving anarcho-capitalist. I don't care. Something that I feel we all inherently have in common as Americans is that we desire to run our lives the way we see best fit. And that's away from government compulsion, from government coercion. We don't want people telling us how to live. We don't want a government telling us how to live our life. We certainly don't want one that is able to weld us into our homes. Or even like now, one that is arresting a father because he wants to play t-ball with his son. We're seeing how easily our freedoms can be taken away due to any sort of hysteria. Apparently all it's starting to take is one pandemic for the government to start infringing upon the rights within the Bill of Rights. So, as we start to move out of this pandemic, as we start to progress away from it and recover, I want to really put this out there and say, as our population grows, as our technology advances, as our wealth increases, what do we value more as a country, as a nation? Do we value our liberty from government? Or do we value a certain amount of liberties that the government allows us to have? And that's really the choice we're going to have to make. With the centralization of power, with governments that are largely centralized and their markets are largely nationalized, like in China, government comes first and the people come second. And with that mentality and with that form of governance, we've seen the greatest evils born out. We saw this in the Roman Greco era. We saw this during the heights of the British Empire. And we're seeing this now with China. And as a country, we have to realize, do we want to start looking more and more like that? We might be built upon different values. But at the end of the day, we're still people. And hysteria will still drive us towards crappy policy, as we see now. And evil policies. So, do we want to continue down this path of surrendering our rights and liberties to the government for a false sense of security? Or do we want to realize that the greatest good that has come about this earth has been the freedom of not only the American people, but how that's inspired many billions across the world throughout time, throughout our existence, to want to be free. We have to make that choice soon as we start moving out of this pandemic. Thank you, folks. I'll make another video soon, and God bless you all.